Hello, friends. So, welcome to our CSS3 course. We're going to build it up from scratch. So, this first lesson, kick back because pretty much going to give you a movie trailer overview of the course. Let's have a look at what we're going to cover in the course. So then we're going to get into the core, what's going on, CSS basics. And here we're going to talk about how to use CSS in the HTML file. We're going to learn how to write code in CSS. Then we're going to get into using color in CSS, really important issue. And in that way, we can craft different colors on our pages so that we can draw attention to the areas that we want attention drawn to. You also have to be able to understand how are you going to see the errors that could be made in CSS. Well, we'll cover that in debug. That way, we're going to see what we do in our code, right down to the fine changes of style. In fact, this feature is going to make our job a whole lot easier because when you're working with CSS, if you can't figure out exactly what you want to do, you can actually go looking for clues when you examine code. Oh yeah, and then also when you give background color to the areas that we'll set up in CSS, you give it a border and watch it pop. We're going to examine the importance of the box model and how it forms the foundation of CSS. And of course, it's a very important issue for us because in CSS, we accept everything as a box. Yeah. And we operate within and on these boxes. So when you understand the box model, you understand CSS. So with the box model, the positioning of the boxes is active. We'll talk about the many different features where we'll be able to position and customize our boxes with position and float features. That'll be our first positioning feature. So we're going to start with a layout in CSS. Now, as CSS evolves, layout features continue to evolve as well. We're going to learn how to prepare the flex layout in a pretty easy way, and that's how we learn the intricacies of Flexbox. Since everybody's using screens of different sizes in their phones and tablets and computers and whatever else we're going to come up with, we're going to want the pages that we prepare to be compatible with these screens, right? Optimized. So for this, we will need to learn the media queries features and prepare responsive pages appropriately. I'll show you how to do that. Makes easy work. We're also going to talk about the grid feature. Now, thanks to the grid, we're going to be using these features that will give us the ability to reposition and position and customize our boxes into dimensions. That's going to make our designing job a whole lot easier too. Now, it's one thing to have me just talk and show you the benefits and everything. But for me, it's a much better way to learn when we actually do applications and projects. So that means that we're going to be supporting all of the things that we learn, right? While we build applications in different projects. You're going to be able to see lectures and practices throughout all of our lessons. Because the important thing here is to be able to use the information for your own builds. So by adding CSS into our HTML information, we're going to gain new capabilities in what we can achieve. So by developing yourself with the information that you're going to acquire throughout this course, you're going to take a huge and very important step for web development, for your future, and everybody else's, because you're going to contribute to the world. Yes. So yeah, that's enough for this trailer. Let's go ahead and start the movie. Hi, my friends. Welcome back. So together we're going to get some extra added pizzazz out of our web pages by including CSS on our HTML. And we're going to use these examples throughout our CSS course. Now, of course, to do this, we will first need to learn how to write CSS. And what we'll do is we'll then talk about how to include CSS in an HTML file. Then we're going to add colors to our web page and learn how to make the web pages, display different styles. So for now, let's get into the basics of CSS. So as you may know, we have created the basics of web pages thanks to tags that we use in HTML. And then we will define style properties for these tags with CSS codes. So let's just have a look now at how to write and what to write first when changing and altering and making these definitions. So as you can see here, the CSS code contains some differences, so it makes it different than tag usage in HTML. So we write the tag that we want to use within the curly brackets, and after typing the name of the feature, put colon, write the value, and we'll end it with a semicolon. So here we can add a second property named value. And then finally, we can close the curly bracket. So actually, we could say that the main purpose of CSS code is to affect more than one object with code. So we can influence more features with less code. That is called efficiency. So now let's start writing CSS code gradually throughout the application. So as I mentioned before, what we'll do is prepare our application using the Atom text editor. So I'm going to just open Atom now, and you can see what I'm talking about. So first off, I'll create a folder for CSS project right here on the desktop in order to not interfere with any of the other applications. And then I'll start Atom. Now, you remember how to produce a basic HTML code. You just write your HTML and press the Tab key. Of course, for this to happen, we will need to save the page that we open in Atom with the HTML extension. And here's our basic HTML code. And first, I'll want to write the title, CSS course. Now we can start filling in the body. As you may know, all of the parts that we'll see on the website were written between body tags. So we can write a head as a CSS lesson with the H1 tag. And perhaps you remember that you can add paragraphs just by using the P tag. And I'll just write a simple paragraph within. It's not necessarily important what it says, but just save the changes and look at what we've done. Look at what we've done. Now let's see about coloring a little bit, and we can log into CSS now. And let's use the style property for this. So let's say that I want to make our head red, and I'll write style in the H1 tag. Then between the quotation marks, I'll just write a color and put colon and type red and put a semicolon. Save the changes and have a look. And there you go. Our title is red. You are doing this along with me, right? So now let's change the color of the paragraph. So let's just make the first paragraph. And for that, of course, in the first P tag, we'll write style, color, colon, and let's write blue and remember the semicolon. Okay, so now let's make the second and third paragraphs blue as well. And then when we save and review the changes, we can now see that our paragraphs are blue. So here we've seen inline CSS by writing a different style for each element, right? That's just a little example of what we're going to do now. Of course, inline CSS, it might seem logical when it comes to the modification of a single tag. However, when you're trying to put a whole lot of details on a very complex page, and when they're going to be using similar features, it's going to be a real pain to write separate styles for each label, don't you think? So, what do you do in that situation? That's why CSS code offers us different preferences. So I'll show you another CSS method. It's called internal CSS. So by using the style tag in the head section, let's just undo the changes that we made just now. I want to show it to you, see how it works. And yeah, okay, so we can see this. So when we refresh our page, the colors are all gone. Now let's open and close the style tag on the head. And as you may remember, we'll specify the label that we want to change. And I'll just write the H1 tag here because I want to make the title red again. Make the curly brackets and write the property colon and value semicolon. Type color, colon, and red and semicolon. And let's refresh and see the changes. Okay, so the title was red. Now let's make the paragraphs blue by using the same method. P curly brackets color, colon, blue, semicolon. And when we refresh the page again, all the paragraphs are blue. Good job. So as you can hopefully see, all the P tags were affected with just one change, right? So here we can affect all of the changes that we want to make on the page with the style tag. However, we do this on an HTML document. CSS, however, will offer us a more, perhaps professional method. It's certainly what you will be using as web designers. With external CSS, we can include an external CSS page and put that into, include it into an HTML document. And therefore, by preparing CSS and HTML code in different documents, we can separate CSS and HTML from each other. However, to do this, we need to use the link tag. So first, let's create a CSS file and do it along with me. So I'm creating this CSS file, and now we can customize this file. So let's say that we want to make H1 red again. And make the paragraphs blue again. And we'll write and save CSS code in curly brackets in the same way. Good. So now it's time to link our CSS file to HTML with our link tag. So delete the changes in the head part in our previous example and restore the application to the beginning. Now let's write a link to the head and press the Tab key. Here we first see the expression REL equals style sheet, which indicates that it is related to the style. Then we see the href tag, and that indicates the root of our CSS file. Now, since our HTML and CSS files are in the same folder, it's going to be enough just to write the name of the CSS file. And when we refresh, and let's look at our page, and we see that the H1 red and paragraphs are blue again. Now we make the color of the paragraph part orange in our CSS file. And let's refresh our page, and there you go. The paragraphs have now turned orange. All right, so that's enough for now. Play around with that to get practiced, because in this lesson we have entered CSS and the magical world. We looked at briefly how to write CSS code in a very small example. We examined the changes on a single tag with inline CSS. Then we made changes to the page using the style tag in the header part of the HTML document with internal CSS. Then finally, we separated external CSS and HTML and CSS documents and learned how to include a CSS file in the HTML file with the link tag. All right, goodbye for now. I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello again, my friends. So in the last lesson, we talked to you about how to write CSS code and how to include them in our file by logging into CSS. We made a few very small changes to text color in the last lesson. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about colors in CSS. Now, typically when we think about colors, we first think of familiar colors such as yellow and green and blue. But if you consider a web page, just a regular web page, have you noticed how many colors and different shades of those colors are used? Now, when you think of the colors by name, we start to get a little confused over, which is what, because it's kind of difficult to really, name by language how many different shades are used. So in CSS, all the colors are formed by combining 3 colors. So these main colors are red, green, and blue. You could say that all the other colors are intermediate colors or secondary colors that we obtain by mixing the main color. So to better understand that, I'll open up Chrome and write CSS colors in Google. So here I'll just click on W3 School. And, oh, by the way, this site is one of the pages that will usually get support for HTML as well as CSS codes. Now, when you examine the page here, there's 140 colors supported by browsers. So these 140 colors are also available on the page with their names. When we examine the page a little bit closer, you can see that hexadecimal values are written under the names of the colors. All right, so let's talk a little bit about hexadecimal digits. And, well, if you're not necessarily familiar with them, it's easy to get confused, so I'll try to make it as simple as possible. As you may already know, we use the decimal system in our daily life. That is numbers that start from 0 to 9 in a decimal system. For example, the smallest number is 0, and the largest 2-digit number is 99. Now, in the hexadecimal digit, the numbers will start from 0 and go to 9, and they don't progress into double digits like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, etc. But they progress as A, B, C, D, E, and F. So in other words, the maximum number with 2 digits in hexadecimal digits is displayed as FF. Now, if we're talking about the display of colors in hexadecimal digits, the colors are shown as 6 digits. So have a look at this. Here, the first 2 digits will show how red the color is. The next 2 digits show how green the color is. And then the last 2 digits will show how blue or how much blue is in the color. Make sense? All right, let's look at an example. So when we look at the color blue here, the first 4 digits are 0. The last 2 digits are FF. Because our main color is blue, there is no red and no green within it, right? Now let's have a look at aquamarine, which is the color here. So it contains 7 F red, green as FF, and blue as D4. So as we can see, when writing color codes, we put a sharp sign here in the beginning. I think that's enough of the explanation. Well, let's just try to understand by making a few examples in Atom, okay? So I'll open Atom and the simple CSS example that we did in the last lesson. All right, so now let's write the color H1 here with code. So first, let's make it green. And I'll put a pound sign, and I'll write 00FF00. And when we refresh and look at the page, you can see that the title is green. So now let's say that I want to change the paragraph colors. So I want to look at the colors and the codes from the site that we just looked at. Yeah, so when I look here, I like the dark orange color, let's say, and I'll copy the code. So when I paste the color code in Atom, we see that the paragraph colors change when we refresh the page. So yeah, because it can get quite overwhelming and also difficult to know the color codes and names, it makes it a whole lot easier if we can see both the colors and the codes and the names on this site. So now let's talk a little bit about the page that comes up when we click on the color picker section on the right side of the colors on this site. So here we can see the shades of the color that would be printed, and with a hexadecimal notation, there's also the representation of the color with the RGB model. So CSS is also another color representation RGB model. In fact, the part numbers that are different from the hexadecimal notation go from 0 to 255. So when writing CSS, we'll write RGB and open parenthesis, and we'll write red content, comma, green content, comma, and blue content, and finally we will close the parenthesis. All right, so let's make an example for an RGB model. Write the RGB model value of the color we chose on our page for our header color and see what changes. And now we can see the value of 255 for red, green, blue, and see nothing in the title section because you get white with a mixture of all colors. So, what happens when you enter 0 for red, green, and blue? Yeah, you get black. Okay, guys, we've come to the end of this lesson. But just to recap, in this lesson, we talked about CSS colors. We also learned how to write colors in hexadecimal and RGB. We also talked about using many different colors in detail. So goodbye for now, and I want to see you in the next lesson. Hi, my friend. So remember in our previous lesson, we learned how to color items on our page? Today, we're going to learn how to set the background and borders, which are pretty much the most basic visual adjustments you can make. So we'll use the background color for many different things like text, divs, tables, etc. We'll write some text on the screen to experiment. Now, for example, we can add a list. Let's write a list of the fruits that we love. All right, so I'm hungry, but I like to keep it healthy too. Write a header on our list, my favorite fruits. And first, we specify that our list will be out of order with the U1 tag. So we're adding our list with the LI tag. So I particularly love watermelon. So I'm going to write this in the first row. Then, cherries, they're not bad either. And of course, we've got to add the strawberry. All right, so that's enough for now. Our list is ready to experiment with. So let's start. So instead of writing the features, what we'll, because you have to do that over and over again, let's write this in a CSS file that we're going to create and use it wherever we want, right? So we'll create a new file for it, and we'll write CSS and its extension to indicate that it is indeed a CSS file. Now, of course, we have to connect our HTML file and our CSS file. And to do that, we'll use the link tag. So all we have to do is write our CSS file to the href attribute. And the important point here is that this CSS file should be in the same place as our HTML file. All right, so now we can start with the background. Now, as I said earlier, we can determine the background color of a variety of things. For example, we can set the color for our header background. So for this, write H1 in our CSS file and open and close the parenthesis, then type background RGB 258080 into that. Now save the file and refresh the page, and what do you see? The header background color is now the color that we entered instead of white. So let's say that we want to change the background color of our page. What do we got to do? Well, for this, we will write body in our CSS file and open it and close the parenthesis. Then we write the background and write the color that we want. For example, let's write it in green. Now, how would the background of our page have a beautiful sea view instead of a solid color? For this, we'll need the address of a picture that we would like to add. I'll do a little search if you want to on Google and just pick any picture. This picture is fine to me. And just copy the address of the picture and paste it into the CSS file. Save it and refresh the page again. There it is. The background is a beautiful sea vista. However, not exactly what we wanted. Our picture couldn't quite fill the page completely because it's small. Did you notice that? Okay, so hang on. The page is covered by pasting the picture side by side, and under it, we might not want the picture to be repeated this way. So what do? We'll need to set the background repeat property to no repeat. But of course, this image isn't quite working well for us. It would be most logical for this picture to cover the whole page, don't you think? So to do this, we can add the background size, property, and cover, and we'll set that. All right, so that makes sense for this picture, but there's some blur in the picture because the resolution is not really high enough. So when we set a background image, just remember to choose images with as high a resolution as possible. All right, so now let's move on to the border. So as with any background color, we can add borders to many objects. So in doing so, we'll need to add three basic properties that the border should have by adding values. So these are width, style, and color. For example, let's add borders to our header. Border color blue. And let's save and refresh our page, and let's just see if the border has shown up. Okay, so nothing came up because we entered only one of the three properties of the border. Did you catch that? Cool. So now let's go back and add our other two features, border width. We'll call it 5 pixels. And that way the border will be 5 pixels thick, right? And border style solid. That way we'll determine the type of border with this feature. It's, a type of pattern. Solid is a type of pattern, actually. So let's save and refresh the page again, and sure enough, the header now has a beautiful blue border. Of course, it didn't quite make sense to write 3 lines of code just to make a border, does it? So why don't we combine these 3 lines in one line, and we'll do it like this. Border, 5 pix, solid blue. And by writing this, we just gave what we want in one line. So let's make another border example to end this lesson. For example, border 2 pixel, dashed line, and get this color that we used before in our colors. And it looks like this. All right. So today we have learned how to add colors and images for the background, and we can see how to make some related settings. And then we saw how we can get in there to add borders to items on our page and how to edit those borders. So that's cool. Play around with that. And we're going to learn some new topics in our upcoming lesson. So goodbye for now. Hello, friends. So in our last lesson, of course, you remember that we learned how to add background and some borders to objects. So today, going to want to talk about the selectors that'll make our job, well, a lot easier when we're designing a web page. Instead of writing the same things over and over again for structures that we're going to reuse because they have the same features, we just need to define them in one place. So, where do we define them? Well, I'll tell you in the application. For example, let's make a list of the places that you need to see before you die. Hopefully, it'll take you a long time to see everything. Okay. So let's create a new file for this first. Now, first, let's have a look at where these places are. And, well, let's just take the first 3. The Great Barrier Reef, Pyramids of Giza, Egypt, Stonehenge. All right, so let's create an unordered list that we previously learned in the HTML classes, right? You remember that. So to do this, we'll just use the UL tag first and then the LI tag for each line. So now I want to, I'll just describe a little bit more. One more thing. When describing web pages, of course, we don't write every single code in a single file. And now I'll show you how. So we will do certain things with CSS instead of writing them into this file. So we'll create a new file, and let's make all the edits that we're going to make in this file. So now, how will our main file be updated with the changes that we've made in this one? Well, by using the link tag. So then we get to our main file and add the link tag, and we're writing our file with the CSS extension in the href attribute. Now, the most important thing to note here is that these two files are in the same place, right? So now that our build is ready, we can go back to our original topic. So now here there are 3 lines on our current page. We'll add a border to all of these lines. Normally we would have to add borders on each line separately, right, like we did in the earlier lesson. But thanks to the selectors, we can just do this in one place. So we'll add this border to the file that we just created. And here we want to change all the lines, so we'll define the border inside the li tag. And make our border 4 pixels thick, and let's just make it blue. And save it and refresh the page to see what the result is. And as you can see, our blue borders of 4 pixels are added to each line. All right, so you might be scratching your head and thinking, do we have to do this process collectively? That is, do we have to assign the same properties to all lines or paragraphs? Well, of course, the answer is no, but that's where we'll need an ID selector. So let's do this again in the file that we created for edits. Now set just a name for ourselves. But the point here is that you've got to be careful that the name doesn't start with the number. Okay, so let's do this. Let's put a £sign at the head when writing this. And here, let's make the background color red for this, background red. And now it's time for, where do we want to apply this change? All right, so we want the first item of our list to have this feature. All right, you with me so far, right? So for this, let's just write ID equals select in the li tag where we created our first line. Save it to try and refresh our page. And as you can see, the change is only applied to the first line. So if we want to, we can make this adjustment for our second line. All we need to do is write the ID expression there as well. Well, then, okay. So what happened here? As you can see, the change is only applied to the first line. Yeah, unfortunately, the ID you can only use once for each page. So if we have a feature that we don't want to use in more than one place, for this, we can use class selectors. So we'll put a dot in this and write a name. So we'll add the feature that we want to add, as we did in the ID selector. Now this time we'll just use the class instead of ID, where we want to add this feature. So if you take this for an example, let's make our third article underlined. And let's add the underlined feature, which is the change we want in our CSS file. So for this, all we have to do is determine the underline name. And as I said earlier, we can just write this by putting a dot in front of it. Okay, so we'll write ext-decoration, underline, semicolon in our parentheses. Then after saving this file, we'll add it as a class attribute to the li tag in the third line where we want it to go, and then we can add it to our original file. Now we can save this file and refresh the page in our browser, and boom, there it is. The third line is underlined just as we wanted. Well, okay, just as I wanted, but I wanted to show you. All right, so in this lesson, we have seen the purpose as well as the types of CSS selectors according to what you want to do and in what kind of situations you get yourself into. Hello, friends. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about font and text decoration issues that are important in CSS. So now we're going to start preparing more organized and beautiful pages, if I may say so. So let's start Atom when starting our topic and create a new HTML file for the font. And I set the name of our page as fontsandtext.html. So our new HTML page is ready, and I'll write HTML and press Tab. And the codes that we use in general are ready, of course. Now here I'll just write fonts and text decoration in the title section. I'll also write fonts and text in the header with the H1 tag. Now, let's say I want to add a few paragraphs and make some changes to the articles in those paragraphs. So for this, I'll go to Google and write lorem ipsum, because I don't want to just add random words to the paragraph section right now. By the way, lorem ipsum generally means imitation writing in the virtual world. Instead of using just meaningless words or, God forbid you should encroach on somebody's copyright, when you're trying out something, we can use these more meaningful paragraphs. And therefore, the documents that we prepare can, just look better visually. And you always see it coming up in templates, so it's a lot of fun to know where it comes from. So here I'll go to one of the pages that I come across and just copy the paragraph part. For now, we got 2 paragraphs, so let's run it into our page and see what we've done. And as you can see, our 2 paragraphs are ready. So now I'll just add the link tag, as hopefully you remember, to the header and to our CSS file externally. Now, if you want to, you can prepare a new CSS file, but I'm just going to continue using the first CSS project.css file that we prepared earlier. All right, so now I'm writing Google CSS fonts before we start making changes to our CSS file. So I'm going just to the first place, W3 School, because, first of all, I just want to see how and what we can make with the font, the changes that we can make. And as we can see, when we open our page, the font properties writes that it defines the font family, boldness, size, and style of text. And when we first look at the font family feature, it says that there are 2 types of font family names: generic family and font family. Now, just not to be confusing here, we just need to write the font family name when using it. So we'll use it like this: font family name. Now, which font family will we use? So in this, I'll Google again and write CSS font stack. So here are the font family names supported on different machines. And when you look through a bunch of them, you'll come across Arial and Tahoma. Those are highly supported on Mac and Windows across most generations of operating systems. Helvetica is also supported on all Macs, while Windows, not so much. Anyway, so you can look at all the fonts you want to later. So as not to be too confusing here, let's do a few font family trials with Atom. So what I'll do is indicate that I want to change the H1 tag in our CSS file, and I'll write the font family. I just put colons here, and I'll write the commonly used Arial, and I'll put a semicolon. Now, it'd be better if we put Arial in quotation marks while typing here. So for this name, it may not be the same way that we used it at first, but if there's a number in front of it, the use of unquoted quotes will throw up an error. So yeah, when we save the changes and refresh our page, we'll see here that the header is in the font called Arial. And I set it here as the font family to Homa for the P tag. And you can see the change by saving and refreshing the page. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but first, let's look at a different font feature, the font style property. So this feature generally indicates whether the spelling is normal or italic. Italic in the font property style is in the P tag, and we can see what changes occur. And there you go. The paragraphs have indeed been italicized. And we'll look at the W3 school again and see the font size feature. Now, when we look here, he talks about two different units of measurement. One of them is pixels, and the other one is EM. So when we look at M, we'll see that 1 M is equivalent to 16 pixels used by default. So the value we specified is 2.5 EM is actually 2.5 times 16, which equals 40 pixels. Make sense? So now I can specify the font size of the H1 tag on Atom as 40 pixels and the font size of the P tag as 1.7 EM. And when we look at the changes, we can see that our articles are getting bigger. Now, the font width is another important font feature. So this feature, it determines how to write the text in whether it's normal or bold letters. Now, before we start using this feature, I do want to set a section with the span element in the paragraph section. So for this, I'll just frame a few words with the span element in the first initial. Now in the CSS file, I set the font weight property to bold for the span element. And as you can see here, when we look at the changes that we made after we refresh our page, the words have become bold. All right, so let's talk about some of the text features as we approach the end of our lesson. So here's the text align feature. With this, we can determine whether our article will be off to the right, to the left, or in the center. For this, I can set the text align property of the H1 tag to center, and look at what that looks like. And yeah, as you can see, our title has been centered. So if we want to, we can write this feature right and make the header over there to the right. But for now, I just want it to be in the middle right now, so I'm just going to do it again for the center. And another text feature is text decoration. So the text decoration property is used to set or remove decorations from our text. So why don't we set it here, a text decoration overline for the H1 tag and underline for the paragraph. And let's have a look at the difference. And now we can see what changes we've made with text decoration when we refresh and review our page. Now, the last feature that I want to talk to you right now about in this lesson is the line height feature. and that determines the height between the lines. So why don't we just go ahead and use this feature to increase the saturation in the paragraph and set its value to 2. Now when we save and look at the changes, the height between the lines is increased. Cool. All right, guys, so today we talked about font and text features. And hey, that's the end of this lesson. So review it if you need to. And I want to see you in the next lesson. So goodbye for now. Hello again, everyone. So, my friends, in the last lesson, we talked about the different features for fonts and generally how to manipulate text. So in this lesson, we're going to examine and correct some mistakes that we probably made while writing our code. So that means we're going to talk about debugging in CSS. Now, naturally, it is an important issue for us because we can sit here and write very long code while preparing web pages, and because we're human, I hope, we can make mistakes. So if we don't necessarily know how to go back and analyze our code correctly, trying to debug these errors can be overwhelming. So I want to show you how to prevent this. We're going to open the font page that we prepared in the last lesson, and we're going to make some mistakes there, and then learn how to debug these errors. All right, so in that last lesson, we've got a few different font and text features, as you can see here, and going to the HTML file, and let's assume that I've made some mistakes where I specify the CSS file name. So let's just delete a letter from here, for example, and now let's take a look at what's going on. Okay, so see, sure enough, we can see that all the CSS features are gone. So how can we fix this error without just, getting lost in the code? Of course, there would be several ways to do this. We're going to start with our first method. I like to start at the beginning. Now, usually I'll use Chrome for my browser. Maybe you prefer different browsers, but that's your choice. But I'll just go to the front page and open that in the browser. So here, I'll press the 3 points under the closure area on the far right in the upper right side. So I click on the customizing page of Chrome, and here, see how I'm hovering over the More Tools tab? And I can choose the Developer Tools option. And in the console section that opens, it's just stated right here what the mistakes are in red. So it tells us that there is no CSS file with this name. So how do we fix our mistake? Well, we got to go back to our HTML file. So we will look at the CSS file name and compare it with the name in the link tag. And we'll just rewrite the letter that we deleted. And what do you know? That's how we correct mistakes. So let's refresh our page. And the CSS features are back. All right. So when we look over here at the console, we see that it's empty because we fixed our mistakes and there are no more problems. So if we just look at a few more things on DevTools, you see how there's a sources section just to the right of the console. Looking at this section, we can see files prepared for this web page and where they are. So when we click on the files, we can see our code. And when we look at the element section on the far left, there are HTML codes and CSS codes written for that element to the right. When we hover over each element here, it shows the area of that element on the page. So I want to talk to you a little bit about a situation that might cause a different error. All right, so we know that we can prepare CSS code in 3 different ways. These are inline CSS, which we prepared using the style attribute, internal CSS, which we prepared using the style tag, and external CSS, where we prepared an external CSS file. All right, so let's say that we use these three methods for a tag. Which will be the priority and which will override the others? So I'll go to the HTML file and I'm going to make some changes so that I can see this. And I'll specify the background color to be green with style attribute in the body tag. And then I'm going to write blue for the background of the body part using the style tag in the header section. Then finally, I'll go to our CSS file and make the background color yellow for the body tag. So I'm going to save the changes and refresh the page in the browser. Now I want to show you how we can open the developer tools in a different way. So I'll right-click on our page and press Inspect. We can do that by pressing Control-Shift-I, or if you're on Mac, Command-Option-I. Now, I usually right-click and say Inspect. I like it because it's easier. But if we look at our page, the background is green. We change the background to green in inline CSS. So here, the priority is inline CSS. So inline CSS is used by default. But here I can select the body tag in the elements section and look what's happening in the style section. And what you see is the priority is inline CSS. So let's have a look at internal CSS and the style tag. Remember, we wrote that in the HTML file. And finally, the external CSS that we prepared with the CSS file. And of course, there is a place here to choose from. So if we want to, we can choose one of them to check the changes that we made. So, for example, let's choose the second option to see if the background is blue. And we can see how it looks like when it's yellow. However, the changes that we make here do not reflect the changes in the HTML or CSS file. So when we refresh our page, everything reverts to the way it was before. So now I'll go to the HTML file and delete the code inside the body tag, and the background is blue, just as we expected. So now the priority is internal CSS, right? Background is yellow when we delete this part too. And that's that. So sure enough, my friends, in this lesson, we talked about the debugging issues in CSS, and that provides an easy way to check while we prepare our pages. And I mentioned the priority ranking of CSS, right? So for now, it's goodbye, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello, everyone. Today, I want to talk to you about the box model, which is really important for CSS. Also, we can have some fun making some applications together. So if you think about CSS as all elements are represented as a box, that's what the box model is in CSS. To break it down a little more specifically, each box model consists of four different, basic parts: content, padding, margin, and border. So here is where the content part is, and where texts and images appear. This refers to the padding of internal space. And margin, it's also part of this outer void. And finally, the border is the part surrounding the box. So learning the box model is, just a quick shorthand of how we talk about changing the distance between elements that we'll use in CSS, how close they are, how we position the boxes, and it's going to be useful as we continue on to some of the more complex features. So we're going to start by creating a box.html file in Atom straight away. And then I want to immediately create a box.css file for CSS. And we can just write box model in the title section here. I want to prepare a box with a div tag. And we don't want to spend too much time in the class section for now, so I'll just write that this is a box. So when we run this way, we can't see a box. As if there's only text that says this is a box, right? So in the meantime, to see the changes that we made in CSS, let's not forget to give our HTML file the CSS file name in the link tag. And we can start to shape our box within our CSS file. So first, let's state the content of our box, namely its width and height. So I'll enter 250 pixels as the width and 200 pixels as the height. And then when I save the changes and refresh the page, we can't see any changes. Why is that? That's right, because we neither have a background color nor a border color in our box. Good thinking. So first, I'll want to give it a border. Let's just call it 3 pixels thick, and line type will be solid and orange in color. So now when we save it and look at the changes, we'll see a 250 by 200 pixel box with an orange border. Okay, so now comes the padding part. So we've talked about this as the inner space. The space between the text here and the area bounded by the border part. We'll give 100 pixel padding and see what that looks like when they're changed together. So just right-click on the text part and say Inspect. So now we can see the padding part more clearly. And then when we look at the incoming part, the green part is the padding part. And look here, here's the 100 pixel space from the top, the bottom, the right, and the left. So if we want to, we can specify the top part, the bottom part, the right part, and the left part separately. So what I'll do is I'll set padding left to 75 pixels, padding right to 100, padding top 75, and we'll go down to the bottom at 100. That way it's all together, and now we can see the difference when I save and review the changes. So we have now determined the values one by one, or using the same value. So now as we can see in our box, it's aligned to the left corner here. So I'm going to want to bring our box a little bit further. So for this, I'm just going to use our margin feature. So I'll set the margin value to 200, and I can see that my box is coming now in the middle when I save the changes and have a look. So here we can see more clearly what we're doing just by saying inspect. So the orange part shows the margin part, and all the distances are 200 pixels. And in this section, if we want to, we can give the top, bottom, right, and left values separately as well. So let's have a look at this with a different style of writing. So I'll write margin colons, initial value, top value is 100 pixels, and right 150, then bottom 175, and finally the left 200, and semicolons. And yeah, refresh and inspect like we did before. All right, and another type of writing is double style. So here, the first value is top and bottom, and the second value is left and right. So if top and bottom has the same value, and if the left and right are going to be the same value, we can use that way. All right, so in this lesson, we talked a little bit about the box model, but more importantly, we demonstrated how and why it's an important topic in CSS. We talked about a box, which is divided into content and border and padding and margin, and those are the four parts in the box model. Now, in our next lesson, we're going to talk about position and float. Goodbye for now. I'll see you then. Hello, friends. Last lesson, we talked to you about the box model, which, of course, is an important subject for CSS. Now, in CSS, we also talked about each element being thought of as a box, and then we talked about some of the features of this box model. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about position properties for our boxes. We're going to talk about four particular properties for position, and these are static, relative, absolute, and fixed. So let's go ahead and open up Atom to explain these properties and just see what differences we're going to create. So I'm going to create two new files named position.html and position.css. And I'm going to just write my codes in the HTML file. I'll write position as a title, and I specify the CSS file that we're going to use with the link tag. All right, so now I'm going to prepare four different divs for positioning features that we're going to prepare in the body part. So I'll make the class part of the divs in sequence, blue, red, yellow, green. Now we can go to our CSS file, create our boxes, and look at the different position properties. So we wrote the names of the class with a dot in front of them. And now we can start filling them in. So first, I'll want to specify the width and the height values of the boxes. Let's make them 100. Then I'll give our boxes their backgrounds according to their class names. So yeah, let's save the changes and then open up our page and see what we're doing. So we have four different colored boxes in a row. And we can give our blue box the position static and see what happens. And no changes have happened because static is already the position feature because that is used by default. So in fact, every element is already static by default. So what if we just put relative in our second box? Okay, so there's no change when we look again. Now, why is that, you might ask? Because the relative property is positioned according to its previous location. So for example, let's take a look at where to go if we make the left and the top values to 30. So as we can see, 30 left and 30 down shift from the first position. So then what happens if we change the values of right and down instead of left and up? Right, so this time, as we can see, it slid right and up and then came over to our first element. So let's have a look at our third feature then, absolute. So in our third box, we can see the difference. And looking at the changes, and well, yeah, looks like our green box is gone. but actually it just is hiding underneath the yellow box because the relative property does not affect other elements and is positioned relative to the previous element. So basically, absolute property affects the other elements. Now, when we made our yellow box absolute, the green box remained underneath of it as if the yellow box just never existed. The yellow box is dead for her right now, so it replaces the yellow box, right? So what happens if we take the yellow box 100 pixels to the right? As we can see, the green box in the previous part of the yellow box, and the yellow box is positioned to the right of the screen. However, when we made the right in the relative property, our red box was shifted to the left side of the screen because the relative property is positioned according to its previous location. Okay. However, I want to show you it's positioned according to the condition of the family that is absolute. So here it's positioned according to the body, right? So when we say right, it goes to the right of the screen. All right, so you'll have fun with that. Let's look at our last feature, the fixed feature. So I'm also going to give a fixed feature to our green box. Now there's absolutely no difference when we save the change because we need to slide the screen to see this positioning feature. So for this, I'll just go to the HTML file and add some paragraphs and then scroll the screen. Now copy these paragraphs. Yeah, that's enough. And we can look and we can swipe the screen. And as you can see, when we swipe the screen, it's always going to appear on the screen in our green box. All right, so that's enough for the position-related features, don't you think? Go ahead and play around with it and discover something new. It's always fun. For now, goodbye, and I'll see you in our next lesson. Hello again, friends. So last lesson, we talked to you about position properties for CSS. So that means that in this lesson, we're going to talk about float properties. And then after that, we'll talk about a few more features. So for right now, we'll start creating two new files named float.html and float.css, just as we always do when we start with Atom. So what I'll do is type HTML and press the tab key. And I'm just typing float as a title. And we'll define the name of our CSS file with the link tag. Now, first off, I want to create two divs in our HTML file. So now I'm preparing two divs for the two boxes, and I will write blue and yellow sequentially in the class sections. I'll save the changes and go to the CSS file and start typing the properties of our boxes by calling them blue and yellow. Then I give the width, the height, the background color for our first box. Likewise, we'll give these features to our second box. And then when we save it and look at the changes, we can see that we have two boxes. So now we're going to want to bring these boxes side by side. So that's where the float feature comes in handy. So we want to bring our yellow box next to our blue box. So to do this in the yellow box, we just give the feature float left. Now, no changes appear when we save and look for them because it should tell you that float left are the two boxes that we want to bring together. So as we saw when we gave this feature to the first box, the boxes come side by side. Now let's see what happens if we just say float right for our yellow box. And as we can see there, only our yellow box is shifted to the right from its first position. So by giving this feature to our blue box, we can bring it side by side again. And this time, the different part came side by side on the right. You see that? So now let's put these two boxes side by side on the left again. And this brings up another feature that I want to tell you about. So in this, I just want to add another div whose class name is green by going to our HTML file. And let's give the features of our third box in our CSS file. So I'll give the width and the height of this box to be 200 so that we can see the difference. And when we save it and look for the changes, as we can see, our green box does not start just below the boxes like we anticipate, because the float feature affects this box, right? Because it came after it. So if we give our third box the clear feature, and then say we are affected by both sides, let's see what happens. All right, so first, our green box moves into position just like we expected. Now, if we do not want the elements to have the float feature to be affected like before, we can use the clear feature. That way, if you want to, we can also say that we are not affected by the left or the right side. So I think that's enough talk about it. Play around with it. It's a great way to move your boxes around. Now, before I finish this lesson, I do want to tell you about the box shadow, the border radius, and the transform features. So for this, I'll want to put our green box somewhat more centrally located because we're going to make changes through this box. Okay, so now I want to shade our green box. So we'll use the box shadow feature for this. And we put the value to 4 when we're using this feature. And then the first of these is the right side length of the lake. The second is the bottom side shadow length. And the third one is the shadow intensity. Then finally, the color of the shadow. All right, so let's have a look at what we've done. As we can see, there was shading in black from the bottom and the right side. So what do you say? Can we just shade from the right and the bottom? Not so much, right? We can change the direction just by placing a minus sign in front of the values, and that affects the drop shadow length and direction. So just consider the minus sign as the opposite direction, not negative. All right, so that's the shading feature. Now, how can we make the corners here? They're very sharp. How do we round them out? For this, we can use the border radius feature. The first of 4 values we'll just give here is for the upper left corner. Second is for the upper right corner. Third, for the lower right corner. And the last one for the lower left corner. Now, if we want to make the same rounding ratio in each corner, we can make it one value. And here we can see each corner is rounded in the same ratio. So now let's talk about the transform property. So it's transform rotate property, and it's used to rotate objects. This way we can give our box the rate of transform rotate, and we can tell it how many degrees we want it to rotate. And what do you think about that? As we can see, our box is turned 60 degrees clockwise. So I think that's enough for today, don't you? We talked about several features about the box model, and I want to prepare a kind of a fun example about all of these features in use that we've learned in the lesson. So I'll go and prepare that, and goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next lesson. We'll have some fun. Hello again, everybody. So in this lesson, we're just going to talk briefly about a display feature in CSS. But before we get onto that feature, I do need you to remember block level inline elements, which we talked about way back in the HTML course. So as we already know, HTML is divided into two basic groups. So these are block level and inline elements. So here we see the most used block level and inline elements. So we can say that tags are the most common block elements, and they're header tags, or p tag, list tags, and of course, div tags. And we can also say that the most common inline elements are img, a, and span tags. So the main difference between block level and inline elements is that the block elements cover the entire line in which they're used, while the inline elements only cover as much space as their content. All right? So I want to give you a couple of examples in the application so that we can understand this a bit more, well, clearly. Hello, everybody. So we've gone over the box model in CSS for quite a few lessons. In this lesson, I want to imagine an application that we'll see on the screen with all of the information that we've learned. So here I've just downloaded a PNG file for the plane, and I created and positioned the sky, the sun, and the mountains with the features that we've learned. So if you want to, and you feel you need to, if you start thinking, I'm not really quite confident, you can pause the lesson here and go back and practice a little bit. And that way you can test what you've learned on this application. But if you're confident to go forward, let's start preparing our sample in Atom right now. So as always, I'm going to get started creating two new files named this time boxexample.html and boxexample.css. In our HTML file, I'll just write HTML and press the Tab key and then write box model practice for the title, add the link tag, and write the name of the CSS file that I'm going to use in it. And now let's go to the body part. So where do we need to start when we look at the image? Of course, we have to create our sky first. So let's make a div to create it and give the class a name, sky. And then by going to our CSS file, typing .sky and opening angle brackets, we can start to specify our features. So first I'll make the width and the height values. So here I gave 750 pixels for the width and 250 pixels for height. You, of course, can use smaller or larger values if you wish, but remember to pay attention to the values that you give when positioning the boxes that we prepare. Now set the background color for the sky. Of course, I don't want to just give it any random color here or even just a regular blue. So for this, I hope you remember what we talked about earlier when we were talking about colors. I'll just go to Google and write CSS colors and click on the first W3 School site. So here I can click on the color picker section on any color. And in this color palette that appears, I'll just click on a color that, is close to the color that I want. So here I'll just choose a color that I like for the sky and copy its hexadecimal value. And then I can just return to my CSS file and give the sky background color. So let's have a look and see what it does on the browser. And that way we can review what we've done. Okay, so it looks like our sky is ready. Of course, in the upper left corner. So how about we get some more here in the middle? So for this, I find it pretty useful to give the body part a margin, because it can be pretty difficult to give different margin values for each box that we're going to use. So that's why I give, for this, I'll just use 100 pixels and 200 pixel values to the body part from the top and the left. Okay, so now it's time to prepare our sun in the sky. So for this, we'll add a new div into the div we created for the sky in our HTML file. We'll write the sun, as you guessed the name of the class, and then switching to our CSS file, typing .sun and creating a box with a width and height of 40 pixels. Now, let me ask you, why did we make a square while the shape of our sound is round? Now, if you remember, we did use the border radius feature to round the corners earlier, right? So what happens if we give half the width of our square for the border radius value. Boom, of course we'd have a round sun, yeah. So now it's time to choose a background color. For this, we can go to the previous site and choose a color. Then after choosing a suitable color for ourselves, we're going to want to add some shading, right? Now, of course, you got to remember to use the box shadow feature. So when using this feature, we're defining 4 different features. We can make the right side shadow length, bottom side shadow length, shade intensity, and the shadow colors, respectively. Okay, so yeah, our sun is ready. But it's not like it's in the right place. And it looks kind of, I want to make it a little bit lower and to the left. I think that'd be nicer. So let's make the left margin for a little bit more on the left side. But for the right, I'm going to want to give some padding values to the sky. So let's see how that looks. Excellent. Okay, so now it's time for the image. So as you may recall, I mentioned before, I downloaded the plain image as a PNG, and I put this in the Photos folder that I created in the CSS folder. Now that our plane is in the sky, we need to write it in the div that we created for the sky. So now let's write the img tag and write photos/plane.png in the src section, and write the plane in the alt section. Now in my CSS file, I'll give the width and height values, and we'll make them 150 for the img tag, and we'll make the distance 500 from the left. So yeah, our sky, our sun, our plane, yeah, that looks ready. Now let's head for the mountains. So let's go to our HTML file. Now there's no need to go into the div that we created for the sky anymore, right? So we'll create another div under this div with a class name .mountain1. Create another div right after it and make it .mountain2 in the class name. And now we can start to determine its features with CSS. Now first I'll make the width 500 and the height 250 and the background color. So here, let's just give it the color green. And then here, we'll just need to round the corner of this box. All right, so let's change this border radius feature. And here the first value was the top left corner, and the second value is the top right corner. Of course, the third value is the bottom right, and the fourth value is bottom left. So now we need to roll our first mountain from the top right corner. So I'll make it 200% in second value, and here we have a little bit of a different way to do it. It's not a pixel value. So here, let's not let that confuse us, because when we look at it, the mountain is positioned a little bit further down and a little bit higher. So for this, I'll just change the margin and write the first value minus 110 pixels. And then I'll make the other 0, because of course, The minus sign here is not negative, right? It's just in the opposite direction. And then finally, I just want to use the float left feature because naturally, remember, this feature allows the boxes to be juxtaposed. So now I'm copying what I wrote and just use it for the other mountain because it has roughly the same features. So first I'll change the name to .mountain2. Then I can nest from the top left corner of the border radius value. So I'm changing the first value. Then finally I'll change the last value of the margin. And our two mountains are overlapping. And yeah, the image is the way we want it to be. It's ready. So I think that's enough for this lesson. I hope that you have time to do some more practice because I think it's kind of fun to be able to manipulate all of this. And it's a great way to actually just explore. And that way you can really master these features. In this lesson, we used a lot of the box model features. In our next lesson, we're going to do up an application that will reinforce everything that we learned. We'll also explore some of the text inside, and we're going to have the opportunity to test the font and text features. So until then, goodbye for now. See you in the next lesson. Hello again, my friends. So in that last lesson, we did some pretty good practice, right? Now in this lesson, we're going to have some fun in a similar way, but a little deeper. I'll show you what I mean. So let's talk about how to prepare some practice for this lesson. So as you can see, there is a food pyramid image with some healthy food. And immediately on the right side of the image, we wrote some articles about them. So we have a header that says healthy food. Now here we've prepared a thick border framing our article. And we've tried to arrange the visibility of our article by changing the sizes and the colors of the words. Here we use the float left feature for the layout. Of course, if you wish, you may want to take the image over to the right, or you can choose different colors than the colors that we've used here. These are the features that give you creative expression, if you will. So let's go to Atom and open up and start preparing our first page. So I'm going to create two new files. These are layout.html and layout.css files. First, I want to go to the HTML file and write the changes there. So I'll write HTML and press Tab. And I'll write in healthy food right into the title. And then we can add a link tag, write the name of our CSS file in it. Now, when we switch to the body part, I'll write a div that will cover our entire page. And then here I'm writing out in the class section. And okay, so we dealt with the header part first. So for this, I'll add a h1 tag, and I'll just write in healthy food. And since the header is ready, I can add the image named healthyfood.png, which I added to the photos folder as a PNG just before. All right, so I'm writing healthy food as the alt attribute. So now it's time to add paragraphs. And like I said before, I want to add lorem ipsum in these paragraphs. So I can go to Chrome, write lorem ipsum, and then I can copy the paragraph part from any page. Then we go back to our HTML file and create 5 paragraphs. And we can save our page and have a look at what we've done. So head, pictures, and paragraphs are ready, but for now they are not where we want it to be. And, it's got to be visually appealing, remember? So that means it's time to switch to our CSS file and prepare that visual part. So first of all, I'll create the border framing for our page. You can do it using the border feature inside the body. The first value of the border property determined the thickness, the second value the color, and the third value the line type. And then I'll just make Arial the font family property and 17 pixels font size. So now I want to give some properties for this H1 tag. And what do you say? We'll make the color red and right center for the text align feature. You remember that we use this feature to align the post, right? Now finally, I'll make the value uppercase using the text transform feature here. I know we haven't really talked about it before, but since I wanted to make all the letters big, you can just have a look at this feature, how it works, because it works in pretty much the same way. So now if we save these changes, let's go see what's going on, because the majority of our page ought to be ready. All right, so let's take a look at the image of the page that we will prepare and see what's missing. All right, so I gave a link to the first word of our first paragraph, and with this link, we are directed to the fish page in Wikipedia. And this word is in blue and bold. And we should also pay attention to this underlined in the second paragraph. So let's see these features and finish out our page. Now return to the HTML file, and we'll want to give a link to the first word of the first paragraph. And you can recall that we also do this by using a tag. And we specify the link that we want to give in the href attribute. And yeah, we also gave our link. So when we press the word, we can try to go to the page that we are redirected to. And yeah, we got to the Wikipedia page, as you can see here. Now we can specify a class for the second paragraph before we proceed to our CSS file. And we'll move on to the CSS file and put in our latest features. First, specify the properties for Hello again, everyone. So now I want to talk about the box model in CSS with you. So we've given values such as width, height, border, margin, and padding to our boxes. So in this lesson, I want to talk to you about the box sizing feature. Because while we are sizing our box, we didn't take into account values such as padding, margin, border. So that's why I want to come back here and do it now. So when we create a box and give it a width and height of 150 pixels, we create a 150 by 150 box. But when we add values like padding to our box, CSS adds these values to the box. So initially, 150 pixels wide reaches and becomes a larger size with the added values. So CSS offers us box sizing to prevent this situation. Now, if you don't want different features such as padding and margin to affect the box size, that's when you use the box sizing feature. So let's have a look and see how we use it and what changes that we can make when we practice. All right, so as always, I'm going to create HTML and CSS files. Specify title as box sizing and link the two files together with a link tag. With a div tag, I'll create a box and give it the class name box1. Now, by switching to our CSS file, we can start formatting our box. Width and height values, 150 pixels. Now for border, I will also specify 3 pixels solid blue. And we can look at our page in the browser, and look at that, our box now has a blue border. Now, right-click on our page and say Inspect. Now, when we look at the dimensions of our box, you can see that it's 156 by 156. But didn't we actually determine the width and the height values to be 150 pixels? So it added here 6 pixels border thickness to our box. So the width value was 150 pixels plus 3 pixels plus 3 pixels, and that, of course, equals 156 pixels. So here, 3 pixels were added from the left, or to the left and the right. Likewise, a height value was 156 by adding 3 pixels above and below. Well, here, let's add a padding value, call it 10 pixels. So when we refresh our page and review our box again, we can see the dimensions of our box are now 176 pixels, because 10 pixels to the right and left 10 pixels are added from below and above. Now, I want to add a second box without using the box sizing feature. So by switching back to our HTML file, I'll create a div with a class name of box2. I'll also give the same features, just like our first box in our CSS file. So I'll make the border color red just so that I can see the difference clearly. Now, when we save the changes, we can see the two boxes, and they're the same size. Now, how do we talk about this box sizing feature then? I'll tell you. There are two different features to box sizing. One is content box, and the other is border box. So for box 1, I specified the box sizing as content box. I save the changes and refresh my page, and ta-da, nothing has changed. Wait, what? How can that be? Because this feature is already on by default, and then it'll include our features in that box size. So what happens if we make box sizing a border box in our second box? Now, As we saw before when we looked at the changes, our box shrank because the other features are no longer affecting the size. So our box now only has a width and height value that we specified. Now, I'm going to show you one more point before we finish the lesson here. If we want all the boxes on our page to use the box sizing feature, well, we can. Just by saying universal selector, and this is indicated by an asterisk, or a different display, we can use the box sizing border box feature in HTML that contains our entire page. We also use the box sizing inherit feature in the universal selector. The inherit property means that it has the same values as the container property, right? So it inherits the same value with HTML. And that's it. We have completed the different features that box sizing gives you. And that, my friends, wraps this up. How to manage your box sizes by using the box sizing feature. So it's goodbye for now, and I want to see you in the next lesson. Hello again, everyone. So today we will talk about displaying the web pages that we prepared with you on different size screens, as well as how to make them show up as intended. So we're going to learn the basic idea of media queries. So that's the way that the screens that we prepare will be displayed on computers or tablets or smartphones without any problems. We call that optimization. All right, so if you're ready to get into it, we'll first create our new HTML and CSS files. So in the HTML file, we'll write media queries in the titles section, and we will link our two files with a link tag. So I want to prepare a container box with some boxes in it, and I'll use the div tag for this. So I'll specify the class name of our outer box as a container, and I'll want to add a header called media queries with the h1 tag. Again, using the div tag, I'll add boxes with a class named box. Okay, so that's enough boxes for now. So I want to write box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4, box 5 inside of the boxes. So now we can start formatting. How we'll do this by going over to our CSS file. All right, so let's start with the outermost box, and I'll make the width 850 pixels, and I'll add a border solid line for 3 pixel thickness, and let's make it blue. So I'll set the margin value to auto, just for the average of our page. And then when we look at the changes, we've got a frame. So let's center our title right away. And yeah, so now it's time to shape the boxes inside. Now I'll specify the width and the height of our boxes. Let's make it 250 pixels. Also make the background color red. So when we refresh our page and have a look, it looks like a single box because all the boxes come upside down. So let's bring the boxes side by side using the display inline block feature. So I'll put a padding value in our first box to be 10 pixels, and that makes spaces on the sides. For the other boxes, I can specify the margin property to 10 pixels. And yeah, the page is ready now. So when we look at it, I change the size of our page, and there is no change in the page we prepared. I can only see the part of the screen size. But if I reduce the screen size, I'm going to want to see everything that I just did, right? So that means it's time to use media queries. So we write @media for this, and we will state where the changes that we want should be. So we can write print here so that the changes we make on the print screen are seen. We can write screen and we can see the changes in different screen sizes. Or we can see all of the changes that we make by saying all in different environments. Now let's see screen. Then we say, and open parenthesis. Here too, he specifies what changes we make. For example, saying max width, 1060 pixels, and then we'll make these changes until 1060 pixels. So I'll copy all the changes that we make here by opening ornate brackets. Now when we look at the changes, we can't see them because we wanted it to appear up to a maximum of 1060 pixels. So I want to add one more media feature. So here I want the minimum width of 700 pixels and maximum width of 1020. And as you can see, I connect with and for every different condition. Now I'll make the width of our container 690 because I want it to be smaller than the minimum display value that we give here. And here, the padding value, margin value, border thickness should be also taken into consideration. And then change the color of the boxes to yellow. So when we save the changes and refresh our page, as we can see, our boxes between 700 pixels and 1020 pixels are yellow. So when it's smaller than 700 pixels, what happens? The first style features come into play again. Cool. So let's make one more media feature visible and look at its smaller size view. So this time I'll put in 690 pixels by 320 pixels. And I'll just make the color boxes brown. And how about red for the H1 for a change? So now I'll change the width of our container box to 310 pixels. And when you have a look at the changes, we can see that the title is red and the boxes are brown. So sure enough, guys, as you change the dimensions of the page, you can see that the style features are also changing. And that's how we do it in our media feature. So sure enough, there you have it. We covered how to edit our page for screens of different sizes, like computers, tablets, or smartphones. So that's goodbye for now, and I hope to see you in the next lesson.